Meu nome é Renê Fernandes, gerente de projetos do Centro de Empreendedorismo. Gostaria de agradecer a presença de vocês aqui hoje à noite. Hoje a gente está recebendo uma empresa de internet já estabelecida, que é a SurveyMonkey, e a gente está recebendo uma empresa de internet que está começando agora, que é a Colingo. Acabou de receber o primeiro round de investimento. Então, vocês vão poder comparar a visão de um CEO apresentando uma empresa mais antiga de internet com alguém com quem está batalhando naquele momento de implantação dessa empresa. Eu acho que essa é a grande riqueza dessa noite. E ver toda a inovação que vem por trás disso lá no Silicon Valley, poder perguntar um pouco de Venture Capital, como é que funciona nesse sentido. Então, eu gostaria muito de agradecer a presença aqui do Dave. Please take your seat. O Dave é o CEO da SurveyMonkey. Gostaria de convidar agora o Lee, da Colingo. Please, Lee. O Rodolfo, que é o Country Manager da SurveyMonkey, por favor. E o Ben também, da Colingo, por favor. A dinâmica, as apresentações vão ser em inglês. A dinâmica basicamente vai consistir na apresentação do Dave primeiro, depois a gente tem uma apresentação do Lee e no final a gente abre para um debate entre todos de perguntas e respostas. Obrigado. Dave, please.
I apologize for doing this in English. When Lee and Ben get Colingo to work the other way and they can teach me Portuguese well enough, then I'll be able to do this in Portuguese. No, it's definitely not their fault. So I'm going to be relatively brief with this. I'm going to talk a little bit about Silicon Valley and some ideas around it and thinking about starting companies and that sort of thing. But I think Lee and I were talking about this ahead of time. You know, it's really hard to kind of understand what people's questions are. So I want to make sure you guys just feel free to ask us questions after we're done. You'll get probably more from the questions than you will from my presentation. But just so I can start a little survey, how many of you are either thinking about starting a business or have started a business? Okay, great. Wow, that's a lot. Okay, all right, good. All right. Silicon Valley, it's sort of this place. It's actually the actual location of Silicon Valley. If you kind of come visit us, it's not nearly as cool or as exciting or as a location as being here is, for example. Lee's in San Francisco, but I'm in Palo Alto, and Palo Alto is kind of the epicenter of Silicon Valley, but it's a kind of small, sleepy suburb, basically. It's not a hip, happening urban center. But I think the bigger question is Silicon Valley, you know, a place or is it a culture? And I guess what I would argue for you today that it's actually more of a culture than a physical location. And yes, there is something to being in the physical area, vicinity of Silicon Valley. There is kind of a dynamism and a startup mentality and all those sort of things. But I sort of think that mentality can extend quite easily beyond the physical limits of Silicon Valley, and that it's happening already. I think the biggest thing about this in the culture of Silicon Valley, it's a place where startups are encouraged and exalted, where people who start companies are put on a pedestal and treated as people who are taking a tremendous amount of risk with their careers, with their finances, probably with their families, because they're not going to see their families as much. A lot of risk. And so in a lot of places, not just outside the U.S., but a lot of places in the U.S., even that isn't necessarily as sort of taken as seriously versus in Silicon Valley as a culture, and I think as it spreads, that concept, that startup mentality spreads, people have sort of taken that with them and said, wow, it is really great to be an entrepreneur. It's great to start a company. But there's some important things to sort of have as part of that. So the first thing that's really important is that it's okay to fail. I like to tell the story about this friend of mine. He and I were going skiing, and his girlfriend was coming with us, and she'd never really skied very much. And he didn't know really how to teach her to ski, and so I said, well, look, let me show her something. The most important thing someone ever taught me to ski when skiing was to learn how to fall. Because if you know how to fall, then everything else is a lot less scary. And the same thing is true with starting a company. If you're not afraid of failing, then it's a lot easier to do all the things you're doing. And so there's a lot of different reasons why you're not afraid to fail. For me, when I started my first company, I was 26 years old. I didn't know any better. But I knew that if I did it and it didn't work, which was the highly likely outcome, I knew I could go get a job. I knew I was going to learn something and work with interesting people, and that was going to be a good set of lessons in learning. And so it was going to be an educational experience, and that's the way I took it. Other people look at it as, you know, they're going to start companies constantly. A bunch of them are going to fail, but one's going to work, and they're okay with that. So, but failure, you have to accept that failure is not only okay, but likely if you're an entrepreneur. Most companies fail. But if you can get over that fact and understand that it's okay to fail, then you can actually be successful. The other thing is the culture is okay with failure. It's totally fine for you to have a failed startup, to have 2 failed startups. There are people with multiple failed startups who then actually did really well. And they failed for different reasons, and people learned their lessons. But being okay with failure is part of the reason Silicon Valley and the culture is so successful. I think a second part that's really important, and this is somewhat more unique to Silicon Valley today, but I think it's changing, is that money is available. There is this incredible pool of people, but if those people don't have access to capital, it doesn't work. And so what's happened is there's been enough success, there's been enough successful entrepreneurs that have made money starting companies, and those people kind of feed the money back into the system. You know, in the U.S., we would call it pay it forward. It's sort of a phrase, but it's there's people invest in startup companies because they want to make money, but there's a lot of investing, and I look at my own angel investing at this point as sort of like people helped me when I was 26 years old. I can't help those people, but I can help the next generation of 26-year-olds who have come along with a really good idea. And so that cycle and that circle, it takes time for that to happen. We're starting to see that in other parts of the world and other parts of the U.S. It's starting to happen here, but there's still been not enough kind of successful exits and successful investments for the money to recycle enough. You need enough of it for it to get recycled into new startups. And then the support mechanisms. This stuff gets overlooked a lot of times, but there's a lot of important pieces that you need in sort of making a startup culture work. You need lawyers and accountants and PR firms and marketers and recruiters, and all that stuff is in abundance in Silicon Valley, and those support mechanisms take time to export to other places, but they're starting to go other places as well. So I guess these are the things that I think are really important, but mostly it's this mindset that anybody can do it. It's a very meritocratic system. You don't have to have a degree from a certain college. You don't even have to have gone to college or finished college. Some of the most successful entrepreneurs didn't finish college. So it's not about that. It's about having a great idea, having the passion for that idea, having the vision for it, and being able to convince people about your idea. So the other thing I would say that's really important about being an entrepreneur, not necessarily about Silicon Valley, but is you have to be really good at sales. I think this is something that's less understood. But if you're an entrepreneur, at the end of the day, all you're doing is selling. You have to sell customers, you've got to sell employees, you've got to sell investors, you've got to sell the press, you've got to sell people on your vision and your passion. If you can't do that, it's very hard to be successful in entrepreneur. Not impossible, Mark Zuckerberg, I would say, is a very successful entrepreneur, but he is not the world's greatest salesperson, but he's the exception. Most people who've been successful entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley are really good at selling. When I started, it was a lot harder. This is a particularly good time to be an entrepreneur. As Lee and I were talking about beforehand, there is all those things in place: accepted failure, lots of funding, support mechanisms. When I started my first company, was very early in online music, and not only did I not know how to go about raising money, I didn't know anyone who'd ever started a company before. So it was a lot fewer companies were getting funded. It was mostly hardcore technology. So the idea that today, with a relatively small amount of money and a good idea, you can start a really great business has changed dramatically. I'll tell you a little bit about SurveyMonkey, because the SurveyMonkey story is actually, I think, quite a good example of this. And SurveyMonkey was not started in Silicon Valley. It was started outside it. But the concept and the culture and the ideas actually did carry through. So just for those of you who don't know what SurveyMonkey is, we are the largest online survey business. We help people gather data to make better decisions. So you create a survey yourself, you send it out to other people, those people come respond on our site, and then you get data on what they've said. People use it for lots of different things. They use it for customer surveys and employee surveys and parent surveys and all different kinds of uses of this tool. But at the end of the day, it's about helping people collect data from a group of people they have some kind of relationship with to make a decision. So the SurveyMonkey story, SurveyMonkey was started by one guy who was a year out of university in Wisconsin. And he was working at a little software company. And someone at that software company asked him to do a survey of their most recent product. And Ryan, who was the founder, he looked around and saw there was no good tools to do it, and so he just wrote his own code. And people at the company started using it for other things. He said, you know, it was 1999, there was a lot going on the internet, you should start a company. And so he did that, and that part wasn't that unusual. There's a lot of that going on. But what was unusual about Ryan's case is he was in Wisconsin. He wasn't in Silicon Valley. He didn't know anybody either who'd ever started a company. He didn't know how to start a company. And so for him, this was just had to figure it out on his own. And so he figured out a couple things. First of all, he came up with a name that's really easy to remember. It sounds a little silly, but that silliness sort of lent itself to being remembered. 2, he made a product that was really easy to use, and he focused on making it really easy to use because he believed in simplicity, but he also, if he made it more complicated, he got flooded with support emails, and since it was just him and his brother, he couldn't handle the support emails, so he had to keep it easy. And lastly, he didn't have any money, and he never raised any money. And so he had to make the product market itself, and he had to get it to generate revenue on its own. But the business eventually grew. I joined about 3 years ago, but 3 years ago there were still only 14 people at the company. The company's always been profitable, which is also very unusual. And today we have about 180 employees in a very large global business. I mentioned this, customers are our sales and marketing team. I mean, this is basically the more surveys that get sent out, the more people learn about us. And then we have this freemium business model where a lot of people use our product for free, but then if you need certain features, you can upgrade to the paid version and get those paid features. And so a small percentage of our users actually pay us, but that still makes it a very profitable business for us because we don't have to spend any money on sales and marketing. The product essentially markets and sells itself. And so this is a great way to build a business when you don't have a lot of capital and you don't have access to resources. I won't try and read the Portuguese here, but you guys get the idea. And so with that, Ryan built just an incredible company. We get almost 50 million unique visitors a month all over the world. We have customers in every country in the world. We have built, really just kind of an incredible business. And it started with just that one simple idea that, hey, how do we help people make surveys more easily on their own? We have customers all different kinds. We have 155,000 customers in Brazil today. Some of these you guys probably know. Pesce Urbano uses us for customer support. I'm going to mispronounce these two. Minha Vida uses us for, there I go. I knew I got Pesce right. To help understand what's going on their site, their users. And Deloitte uses us for training evaluation, so internal use cases. Just to sort of wrap up, I mean, I think when I think about Brazil and when I think about what the opportunity is here, we've made a big commitment to Brazil. We've hired Rodolfo, who's our first country manager anywhere outside the U.S. We think Brazil is a tremendously interesting market for us to focus on. But I think for you guys who are thinking about businesses, I think you want to think about the business, think about how you can make a global business someday. But you're fortunate enough to be in a market like Brazil where you can build a very large business here domestically. And I've been very fortunate to meet the guys in Mercado Libre and Netshoes and Decolar and Net Videos, and just really incredible entrepreneurs who are doing great things. And they started very simply. A lot of them started without a lot of capital, and they've been able to build great businesses domestically here, and now they've expanded internationally. But I think you're fortunate that you can build a great business here, but then you can think about how to grow the business outside of Brazil eventually. So other great companies that are here. I think it's still very early in Brazil. I think there's a lot of categories and a lot of opportunities of things that have not been built yet. We were talking about this beforehand, Lee and I, that it's, people talk about cloning successful companies in the U.S., and that is the case. You could call Pesce a Groupon clone. But they've built a different business than Groupon did, and I think that's a testament to them that they've been able to build a great business here, despite starting off with some of the original, someone else's ideas of how to get into that space. I think there'll be a lot of great companies built here. A lot of them are going to be based on ideas that were created elsewhere. But there's a lot of reasons that things have to be built locally to be successful. And I think you've got a great opportunity here if you're thinking about starting a company. So thank you. And I will, obrigado, and I'll turn it over to Lee.
Beautiful. Thanks, Ben. All right. So Colingo is about, so how many of you guys have gone to an English school? Is that the way that you learned school? Okay. Cultura Inglesa, Wizard, all of those places? Okay. You like those schools? You like them? They're okay? Okay. So what we're trying to do here at Colingo is really take that intermediate English learner, an advanced English learner, and help them become fluent and help them participate in the business world. And as young entrepreneurs like yourself, you're probably going to want to, as you build your billion-dollar businesses, you're going to want to grow and do into other markets. And we'd like to be able to give English learners in Brazil the skills to be able to speak fluently. So it's English fluency powered by our technology, which we call Speak Assist. So this is a little bit about our team. You met Ben, and you've been his technical chops have been proven. I started a business when I was at the University of Pennsylvania. As David said, we're not afraid of failure in Silicon Valley. It failed. But now I'm here doing the business that is not going to fail. And I've had some experience at Comcast Interactive Media. Comcast is the biggest cable company in the U.S., and I got introduced to the Valley that way, working with a company called Plaxo. And Ben, I should mention, has a background in neurolinguistics, and it was really his idea to do Colingo, and we'll get into that a little bit. Actually, it's kind of a good story. He was down here, in Latin America about 5 years ago. and tell me if I get any of these details wrong, Ben. And he was traveling around and having a background in neurolinguistics, and traveling and talking to a lot of people, and realized that the only thing holding a lot of the smart people back here there were tour guides, and they could only speak Spanish, and this was in Chile. And they were worried about the English-speaking guides from other towns, and the only reason that they were getting better clients is because they spoke English, and they were trying to learn English on all these books and all of these things. And Ben realized that there had to be a better way. So he actually taught himself how to code to solve this problem. And over the last 5 years has had it as a side business, and about a year ago joined up with me, and we've taken it into our full-time effort, and I'll tell you more about that. So these are some of our investors, and I actually learned a week ago that David actually is an investor, and that's so I better do well. Give me a good round of applause here afterwards. So I think that's another interesting story about Silicon Valley, is that it's a very small community, and I think that's really valuable. So if I ever potentially wanted to learn a lot from David, I could. And and hopefully one day when I dominate the Brazilian market, he'll ask me questions about Brazil. So this is the problem that we're trying to solve. So I think this probably speaks to potentially a lot of those people that raised their hands when they said that they were sort of intermediate to advanced English learners. So the blue line there is what we think is pretty easy to get up to a pretty basic level in English in any language you're learning through grammar and vocabulary. But what we found is it's really, really hard to become fluent. So that green line there, it shows people that go abroad and can live in the US or live in Canada. I know a lot of you guys go to Canada to learn. And that's an awesome experience, and I'd fully recommend it. But most people don't have the opportunity to go and live for a year or two abroad, and they get stuck. So that's the problem we're solving. So what Colingo does is we connect you with native American tutors for conversational practice on the web. And these are some of our tutors here that are online. And if you want to develop a Southern twang, I recommend talking to Patrick. Steve can probably do a pretty good New York slang, and if you're lucky, you can probably ask him for some curse words, and he'll probably tell you. And Deneen's just a sweetheart. So we have the ability to connect you to native English tutors online instantly, so that from the comfort of your home, not in a big classroom of 20 people in Cultura Inglesa. But it's not just about speaking, or not just about talking. It's about getting very clear feedback and data as you learn, and knowing where you are in the course of the language. So this is actually a screenshot of the toolkit that all of our tutors have. And these are tools that they structure each lesson with. And you see there's a big chat box on the left there. And then on the right, what we call our resources. So we have many of these resources that are actually designed specifically for Brazilian learners who are learning English. And these are a set of common problems that we can help identify and then suggest treatments to. So a really common one is trouble with the ED. So we hear a lot of like it, and that's just, the fact is it's really hard for Portuguese speakers to pronounce certain things in English, and trust me, it's very hard for English speakers to pronounce many things in Portuguese. And I always, when I tutor on Colingo, try to tell people, trust me, people are worried about their English. Their English is way better than my Portuguese, so I wouldn't be concerned about this. So basically, we're giving tutors very advanced tools to be able to identify problems for learners and delivering feedback, which you'll see here, to learners. So you'll be able to, this is what we call your dashboard. So you're actually able to see the conversation and listen back to it, and then go and skip to points in the conversation where you've made errors, and then you can listen to the tutor giving you the recommendations to how to fix those errors. And this is just the beginning. We want to give learners very detailed analysis of particular problems that they're having and ways to address those problems. So it's really about data. It's not just talking. So I get this question a lot. David asked me earlier. My friends from school ask me, and they always think you're going to Brazil because the women are beautiful and there's a lot of beaches, right? And the fact is, that's true. But we think that there's a huge opportunity, and entrepreneurs often tell you, or should say, is you let the market sort of dictate where you want to take the product. So the story is, we, about 7-8 months ago at this point, put up a very basic prototype of Colingo on the web, where you could, as an English learner, come on and just talk to a native English speaker. And, people from China came, and people from Korea came, and people from Japan came. But people from Brazil came in droves, and they just kept coming back more and more. And I think it's something to do with the social nature of the Brazilian culture. And when we started this business, we thought that it would probably be a business that would want to focus on China and Japan. But what we realized is that there's this huge opportunity in Brazil. So I think I'll get to them here. Well, that's more of the positives of the business. But multinational companies are coming into Brazil, and I don't have to tell you all of this, obviously. The World Cup and the Olympics, and we just think that there's a huge opportunity here, and we're really excited about it, and we're learning every day. The more and more I come down here, the more and more I'm excited about Brazil as an amazing opportunity. And as David said, I think it's an amazing place for you guys to build businesses. And it's interesting because I'm an American coming down here wanting to build a business here, where you guys have this great opportunity. So you should feel excited about that. So there was an article recently in the Washington Post. I'm sure many of you have seen it. Will the next Zuckerberg come from Brazil? From my perspective, and I've been here a few times and connected with a lot of the entrepreneurial community. I think that there are some amazing things that you guys have going for you, and then some challenges. So I'll start with the positives. I think that there's an amazing Brazilian passion. And as David mentioned, you really need to believe in what you're doing, because fundamentally, and there's another reality, you could look at passion as being a little crazy. So I think I've met many Brazilians, and I think Rene is one of them. He's a little crazy. That's why I like him. And you have to be a little crazy to do what we're doing, because we're hoping to change the world. So I think I've seen that in a lot of Brazilians, and I think that's really exciting. You have to have the passion, just be crazy. The other thing that's been awesome for me to see, and that I think is a real positive for an entrepreneurial culture here, is the Brazilian way, or I'm going to butcher this. Someone say this for me. Gentino brasileiro? Okay. So, what? Yeah, right. I'm working on it. So what that is it's called the Brazilian way. And so basically, recently we were at the mall, and Ben and I were trying to figure out how we could get a Brazilian cell phone number. And we went to Tim, and they told us, well, you're going to have this problem with this card, and you don't have this thing, and you need to maybe buy this plan. And then we were actually with a Brazilian. And then he went over to the woman and said, is there a way to do this? And then she said, yeah, well, you could actually fill this form out, and then you go across the street and you talk to Claro, and then you get this card. And I was just shocked. And I was taught what they told me, it's the Brazilian way. There's a way around things. Things are hard sometimes. There's a lot of bureaucracy. The traffic is crazy. But there's usually a way around that. And that's a very, very important entrepreneurial trait. Because as we're building businesses, there's a lot of headwind. There are tons and tons of challenges, but the ability to say, there's a way to do this, there's a way around it, that's what it is. That's what it's about. So I think that's an amazing thing that you guys have ingrained in your culture, and I would recommend following that. Again, growing domestic market, I think that's an obvious one. And it seems to me, and cell phone companies being one of them, there are many, many, many industries that are ripe for disruption here. And I think that David and I were talking about, there are many different verticals in which businesses should be grown because there's more efficient ways to do it. And I encourage you guys to go do that. I think some challenges. and in some ways an opportunity, are bureaucracy and infrastructure issues, where these headwinds, these challenges in which you're going to have to figure out the Brazilian way around exist, and that's clear to me as well with taxes and the like. And something that David also mentioned is there does seem to be a little bit of a stigma towards failure. And as I understand it, bankruptcy here is really difficult. When a company fails, it's ugly. And I think that's unfortunate, and that should be changed. The way that businesses work in the US, if you fail, it's not great, but the bankruptcy is a pretty clean process. So I think that's something that you should talk to your legislators and change. Another thing that I've noticed is I've talked to a lot of entrepreneurs, and they have had to raise money at lower valuations than what exists in Silicon Valley often, and they've had to go door to door in some ways. And there certainly are wealthy people here, but there's not sort of this angel community that exists in Silicon Valley, which gives you the money to start your businesses within a seed and Series A funding environments. And I think that's something that's going to need to grow for you guys to continue to grow your business. And I think that's changing. I've seen more and more like Monoshis and some other early investors coming in here, and that's exciting. But I've talked to a lot of entrepreneurs that literally have had to go door to door and say, hey, Mr. Rich Man, this is called technology. There's this new thing, the web, and you should invest. And a lot of these guys are old conservative money, and that's a tough thing. And we're lucky enough to have angels like David and other people that are invested in us that understand that there's this big opportunity and are willing to pay it forward. And then another thing that I think is really important is the community that exists in Silicon Valley and the willingness to share ideas. I think, I'll go and I'll talk to people about my business and tell them what we're thinking and what our plans are. And what I've noticed here is there's a bit of a hesitancy of entrepreneurs to do that. And I think that's unfortunate because ideas are pretty cheap. It's really about the execution and how you're actually going to do it. And you'll never be able to get real feedback on your ideas unless you're willing to talk to others about them. So I would recommend sharing those ideas. Another thing that's important here is as Amazon Web Services and a lot of all of these tools that make it possible to start a business are distributed across a wider group of people, it's easier to get somewhere quicker, which is a positive, but also a negative because on the same level that those people that are also trying to do businesses like you are gonna get to that level quickly. But the difference is if you're able to get quick feedback and share ideas, then you're gonna be ahead of them. So I'd recommend telling people your ideas and not being afraid of copying them. So that's all I have. Thanks.
Thank you very much for your talk, Dave. Thank you very much, Lee, for your talk. For me, it was very interesting to see how he's still pitching his venture, and you're not anymore. So he's still trying to sell it and the idea of the business, and Dave is completely sure that SurveyMonkey is a validated market. But I would like to open for questions from the audience now. If you have any questions, please let me know. If not, I have a few questions for now. Does anyone want to start?
Hello. So first of all, congratulations for your presentation. I have a question for both of you, more on the business model of each company. I understand that SurveyMonkey is based on a free basic product and then a plus paid product, correct? And what about Colingo? How does that work? And I don't know if both of you could comment on this business model, please.
Yeah, ours is often referred to now as a freemium business, although we were around before that word was used. But there's a free and a premium version, which is how you get to freemium. And most people sign up for our free version, and they're very happy using it. And then some people need some of the features in our paid version upgrade to paid. The reason it works so well is that even our free users actually are telling people about SurveyMonkey because they're sending out surveys that have our branding embedded in them. And so the free users actually are quite valuable to us, even though they don't actually pay us anything directly, because some of their work will get us people who will eventually pay. And we don't really spend much money on marketing. We don't have any salespeople, so it becomes a very high margin business for us. Our gross margins are kind of 95% gross margins because it's just a software tool that we're selling, and then therefore, if we don't have a lot of marketing costs, then it's just our fixed costs of the business. So it's a very, at scale, these freemium businesses are very profitable businesses. And if you can come up with something that works as a subscription business, and there's a bunch of nice ones here in Brazil. LocaWeb is a very nice subscription business for domains. Catho has a subscription business. So there's a bunch of people who've built nice subscription businesses here. I think it's a great model and very low level of capital required often.
So currently, Colingo is premium without a free offering. So effectively, you can buy a month subscription or monthly service, which gives you a certain amount of time with a tutor, and then some exercises that are associated with those sessions. But we are experimenting with some free offerings as well to do what David said. I mean, a lot of our business is different in the sense that for each marginal unit sold, so each new conversation, we have a cost. There's the tutor's time. So it's not your traditional software business where every time Microsoft Office is produced, there's very little marginal cost for that additional unit. So we're playing with some premium offerings, and we're pretty excited about those. So, it's still early. We're still experimenting with a lot of those, but currently it's premium.
Is there like a tryout period or not?
Yes, of course.
Okay.
There is a free trial. Yeah. And if any of you guys are interested, hit me up.
How did you get the idea of your business?
So mine? So,
Both.
Well, if Ben wants to talk about that, he is really the originator of the idea. I mean, it's evolved a lot since he had initially the idea, but Ben's the best person to talk about that.
Sure. So how many of you who are doing businesses now, I'll answer your question with a question. How many of you who are doing your businesses now had some kind of academic or career experience in that field? Curious? Okay. So for myself, I studied neuroscience. So what I studied was how we learn and how the brain works, and it's always been very fascinating to me. And in addition to that, I traveled around, and I was in South America. And in the United States, it's very different. The whole perception of learning languages is a luxury and is considered a luxury for people. To learn a second language is not anything that we would consider a necessity. It's nothing like what learning English is. And that's always what I had thought. I never thought about learning languages as something that you needed. And being down in 2005, 2006 in Chile and Valparaiso and a bit through Peru, I was really surprised and almost flabbergasted by something that's very obvious to all of you, which is that learning English is an absolute necessity for business, for travel, for so many reasons. And I was also very flabbergasted at how difficult it was to get this very basic necessity, something that was really needed. And I saw people jumping through so many levels of hoops to try and get basic English. And that was the real motivator for me, is feeling like this is a matter of infrastructure. And it's just something that needs to be there in order to allow people to live their dreams, to accomplish their dreams, to do the things that you want to do in life. It's just something that's needed. It's like a road. And that's my personal interest. It's my personal fascination. So being able to combine something that I had studied with something that I saw as just necessary, and there were too many levels of friction, too many blocks in getting it. At Colingo, we're determined to break those barriers and make that not a problem.
So I unfortunately did not start SurveyMonkey. I talked about Ryan, who was the founder, and his idea, but I'll tell you a little bit about my first business, which I started, which is probably more relevant. in this situation. And I think it kind of goes to what Ben said, which is it really is helpful if you have some knowledge about the area you're going to start a business in. It's not always required, but it certainly helps because there's going to be all these obstacles. And so if you know something, or you have some specialized skills or knowledge that can be helpful to you in starting a business, it will benefit you. It'll be easier to raise money. It'll be easier to build the business, all those sort of things. So I started my first business. It was one of the first online music startups in 1994. It was called Launch Media. And I was working at a record label at the time, and I saw that radio and MTV, which were the primary ways in which we help people discover new music, were becoming too congested as promotional vehicles. That there was more great music that people weren't hearing than they could get there. And I saw that the computer was becoming this other way for people to learn about and discover music, because the computer in 1994, and many of you were too young to remember 1994 in any meaningful way, but you know, the computers were just starting to add good quality sound, you were able to do a little bit of video, and so it was possible, not even really on the web at this point, but just on the computer, that it was possible for people to learn about and discover music that way, and that you could build an ad-supported media business around it. So I had people, all sorts of very smart people. So you want to get feedback, and absolutely agree with Lee about feedback, but you don't want to listen to all the feedback, because a lot of feedback you get is wrong. So you want some people to think it's a good idea, but if everybody thinks it's a good idea, it's probably not. And if nobody thinks it's a good idea, it's probably also not. There's some middle ground in there. But hopefully the people you trust and are going to be honest with you give you good feedback, both positive and negative. But we were told a lot of things by people. We were told that, you know, no one's ever going to want to listen to music on a computer. No one's ever going to watch video on a computer. No one will watch an ad on a computer. So there were no ads back in 1994 on the computer. These are really smart, very successful people. Some of them are some of the most successful venture capitalists today in Silicon Valley, who were also just starting their careers. So you can also be very successful and be very wrong many times. So we pushed through all that. And one guy actually, who shall remain nameless, but very successful VC, actually was like, oh, I get this. This is really going to work. Like, this is going to be the way people learn about and discover music in the future. But you guys are never going to figure this out. He's like, MTV and Rolling Stone, they're going to crush you. Why would you guys make this work? So, you know, we pushed through a lot of those things, and we were actually able to make the business work, and we took it public in 1999, and we sold it to Yahoo in 2001, and I stayed 6 years at Yahoo running that business. So I almost did 14 years in that same business, and built it up to the largest music site in the world, largest video site, internet radio site, et cetera. So, you know, a bunch of that growth came after I sold to Yahoo, but it was still the same business and the same vision. So.
Hi, I'd like to ask, what do you think that it takes for someone to get an internship or even a early job in Silicon Valley, for example?
What do you do? Anyway, I don't know that. We actually have an intern in Brazil, but maybe we could use some more. So you can come and talk to me afterwards. But I don't know what the rules are from an immigration perspective coming in. I'm not sure if an H-1B would qualify. I'm not sure if you know.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think our immigration policies in the U.S. are the biggest problem. So there's probably a lot of really talented, qualified people that we should hire that we can't because of immigration. That being said, if you have specific skills, people will go through a visa process for you. But it's hard if you're trying to get those skills to get someone to go through the visa process for you. It's a kind of a crazy chicken and egg problem. Hopefully someday we're going to fix our immigration problems in the U.S. But probably the best way to do it would be to find a way to go to school in the U.S. And while you're in school in the US, you can then kind of get to work with a company, get to know them, and they don't have the burden of trying to figure out the visa thing at that point in time. And then once you have some experience, and so we've hired a lot of people who came to the U.S. on a student visa, and then we were able to hire them. In fact, I think our lawyer, actually, which is sort of unusual, we got him a visa, and he's from Australia, and but he was studying at Stanford, getting a master's in law, and we were able to hire him and then get his visa sorted out. So there's not an easy process, unfortunately, but it's mostly an immigration problem. That's our red tape.
And I'll just add one thing to that, which is don't be afraid to learn how to code, because if you practically want to get to Silicon Valley, being able to do the nuts and the bolts of it is absolutely the easiest way to get there. For example, like we currently are filing an H-1B visa process, which is very expensive, very difficult to do, to bring someone to the US to come work for us. Because it is very, very, very difficult to find people who are qualified and know how to actually code. But that's something you can pick up some books. If you have the motivation, that's something you can teach yourself. And I would say don't be afraid to do that. There's some great websites.
Hi, I have a question actually for both of you. It's something like the business model, actually for the revenue model. If you ever considered using it as an advertising tool, because right now with all these apps and websites, they're using a lot of, one of their main revenue streams are from advertising and this kind of revenue. And the other question is something related to the Colingo. How are you making the bridge with the Brazilian market? Do you have, as you said, you have one intern that is working here, but is that something that you're planning to, if you're going as a main institution to provide English to Brazilian people? Actually, I think maybe you need some something more solid, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and it's something that we're working on. So I've come down here a lot, and I think of my initial trips here as basically an explorer. I'm trying to understand the market. I'm trying to learn a little Portuguese, and it's tough. And I am looking at possible distribution partners. So there may be an investor that might have access to interesting distribution channels for us. But that's something that we're figuring out. And the more time Ben and I are here, I think the better. And we have a lot to learn, but we're working on that. So yeah. And then the other question was about the advertising business model. Yeah. So for us, we don't think that that's going to be the route we go. That could change. But we think it's the analogy that people are used to in the consumer market for paying for classes or paying for private tutors' time is one that makes sense for us. And we're probably not going to go against advertising. So,
I think it depends on the business. So, but if you look around on the internet, there's only a few ways people get paid that scale. One of them is advertising, another one is subscriptions, and the third one is some kind of e-commerce or listings businesses, right? Which is sort of like advertising, but there's usually a transaction involved and you're taking a cut in the middle, Mercado Libre or something like that. They're all sort of related to each other, but what I would say is in Silicon Valley, there's probably been too much overemphasis on building ad-supported businesses, i.e. just build a lot of users and a lot of traffic and then hope to build some ad revenue behind it. I'm personally kind of skeptical about that because what's happened is that online advertising has gotten a lot more efficient and a lot more transparent on pricing, and the pricing has come way down in terms of what it costs to buy an ad, and there's a lot more inventory being created as more people are spending time online, and so you have this supply-demand imbalance that not only is it more efficient, but also there's a lot more of it, and so as a result, it is very difficult to make a standalone ad-supported business work these days. I mean, you look at Twitter. Twitter has massive numbers of users, right? It doesn't actually make money on advertising. It actually makes more money doing licensing deals for its data and its APIs than it does on ad money. Now, it may eventually get there because it has such massive scale, but if Twitter has a hard time building an ad business... Now, that being said, in certain vertical markets, there is plenty of ad dollars. So business like Yelp in the US, which is local advertising. There's a lot of money in local advertising. There hasn't been a good solution. Or in healthcare advertising in the US. So there's certain vertical markets where there's large pools of ad dollars that have not been effectively addressed. And so I think if you're going after those, but if you're just trying to build a general consumer internet application and sell a lot of ads, you can't make the numbers work. There's just the math isn't there. I mean, we get almost 50 million unique visitors a month, but we would generate a fraction of the revenue we did if we sold ads to those people instead of subscriptions. So,
any other questions?
I make a question in Portuguese. So when translate, como é que a Colingo vai lidar com a questão que, pelo menos para mim, fica muito claro que os brasileiros não são muito voltados a pagar por serviços via web. A gente tem uma certa resistência a pagar por serviços. Ao mesmo tempo que a gente demanda muitos recursos, mas tem uma crença fixada no Brasil, nos usuários brasileiros, que tudo tem que ser de graça e é obrigação até do outro dar de graça e eu tenho que consumir. Como é que vocês vão lidar com isso assim?
You got it, or you want me to translate?
Let me guess. I think you asked about the hesitancy for Brazilians to pay on the web. Was one part, right?
Yeah.
And the other part, I don't know. Yeah. The other part, I don't know.
No, he just elaborated on that. He just elaborated on that. He said that Brazilian is really resistant to pay on the web, and they think people should give services for free on the web and be profitable using another ways instead of charging its users.
Yeah, I think there's two things. One is I think that is changing. I've noticed that, I think the numbers actually recently in 2011 show that Brazil's e-commerce market is actually bigger than Mexico. So it's now the largest e-commerce market in Latin America, which is an encouraging sign and growing quickly. So there are some businesses that are charging people money and people are paying, and I think that's just going to grow. The other thing in an analogy to, I think what I mentioned before, people are used to paying for private tutors and used to paying for schools here. So it's not as if this is we're selling a service that's something that people are not sure if they should be paying for. They understand that this is someone's live time that we're basically selling. So I think that there is that going for us too. So those two things. Yeah.
I'll say one other thing about that, which is, right now what we're involved in are some of the technical challenges of how to actually collect money online, even from people who are willing to pay and are excited about our service, but we have problems actually bridging that gap. And so that's something we're actively looking into right now, and one of the reasons I'm here, actually. And so it's a huge challenge. I think one thing that's been interesting to me is I've seen that some other websites, I've been investigating other e-commerce websites in Brazil, and I've seen some practices on them that are completely insecure in terms of how they're taking credit card numbers and how they move their information. I look at it and I can't believe that that's happening. And so I don't blame you for being skeptical about purchasing online. I would be too.
Scare too many of them.
But, you know, so I think that's a big question for us. How do we convey security? How do we convey that, you know, this is legitimate, that this is safe? How do we bridge the gap of payment methods and domestic credit cards and boletos and the whole deal? So that's something that you guys have a home court advantage on. And, you know, that's something that, you know, you're going to know better than any foreigner coming into Brazil. And that's, you know, a big deal for you. So use it.
Yeah, I agree. I think payment processing is actually just kind of like the behind the scenes stuff is very broken here. And we use one firm, we're about to add another provider, we probably need a third one. I mean, it's really like a lot of overhead to get the back end side of it. But I think it depends what the context is, but I agree. Like, I think that it's changing and people are, and there's some really big e-commerce companies. I mean, Netshoes is massive here, right? I mean, it's bigger than whatever the equivalent sites are in the US for athletic goods online. So I think it is changing. People will get more comfortable with it. What I will say is that kind of the broad internet usage is newer here in a lot of ways than it is in the US. People had those same attitudes in the US. It took a long time for people to get used to paying for things online. I hear that all the time about China too right now, that people are saying people don't pay for things online, but there are some really significant e-commerce companies coming. And so it just takes time for people to get comfortable with it. You know, people going from buying a few things online to sort of shifting their behavior to buying everything they can online. Like, that takes time. You've got also the other thing that sort of impacts the e-commerce market here is the logistics. Logistics are really painful. So it's very hard for companies to sort of get up and running and create a lot of value on the e-commerce side with the logistics the way they are. But a lot of companies are now figuring it out, but it's harder. So I think it'll take longer, but I think the shift is happening, and it's happening, you know, the fact that people will also be able to get smartphones with good connectivity will sort of get past a lot of the dial-up issues, the connectivity issues. So all the trends are headed in the right way. So I think 5 years from now, we'll look back and go, oh yeah, that was still tough for people to pay, but we solved most of it at this point.
I think I'll just skip you for 1 second, because I think that's aligned to my question. I saw in your presentation, and I think Rodolfo can answer that. You have right now how many subscribers here in Brazil?
Nós temos aqui no Brasil 155 mil assinantes.
Are they paid or free accounts?
Both.
You're counting
Yes.
on both. And I saw that you have the prices in reais on the presentation. So you're already charging in reais.
Yes.
So when did you do that migration from charging only in dollars to reais? Was that recent?
Yeah, about 2 years ago.
Okay.
We started charging reais.
Because when I actually used SurveyMonkey for my dissertation, all the responses were collected through SurveyMonkey. Then I paid one account in dollars at the time for my dissertation. And how was the pricing strategy decided for Brazil? Because as I can remember, if you convert dollars into reais, this is a little different from what I used to pay back on that time.
Yeah, so again, the currencies move around on us. So we set the prices, I think we launched Real, sort of October of 2010. So yeah, not quite 2 years ago. But and at that point in time, we did pretty close to the US pricing. And then what's happened is obviously the dollar's gotten weaker since then, and so the prices have. So now it's probably a little bit more than its equivalent, but the idea was to be pretty close to the U.S. dollar equivalents. So, but then we don't adjust them all the time. We just leave them where they are. So, you know, some markets it's gotten a lot cheaper. Like India, it's ridiculously cheap relative to the U.S. dollar. But you just can't. We can't move prices on customers all the time. So we had to just pick a price that made sense. But I think when we did it, it was basically at parity.
Okay, and I was going to ask you also, how can I say that? Why establish an office here in Brazil?
So, as I think I said, kind of Brazil is one of our sort of priority markets. SurveyMonkey's been available all over the world since we started, but it really only was successful in a scalable way in English-speaking markets for a long time because the site was only in English. We only had customer support in English. You could only pay us in US dollars. So we started launching local language sites about 2 years ago to sort of address that and adding customer support and all those sort of things. And we saw Brazil was growing very quickly. And we see that the potential for Brazil is to be a very, very large market for us. Today, it's our kind of second or third largest non-English speaking market. But that's still relatively small just because it takes time for us to build up the viral awareness and the flow and the user base and people to get used to us. So we decided that the best way to kind of go after Brazil was to hire somebody here. And so we hired Rodolfo, and we're try different ways to use sort of business development partnerships, marketing, PR, et cetera, to grow faster than just the organic growth rate would let us do in Brazil. So we're very happy with Brazil as a market, but it has the potential to be 30 times larger for us than it is today if it gets to kind of the parity of where the English-speaking markets are. So that's the opportunity, so we're willing to kind of invest in that opportunity. But we're not going to do that in every country in the world. We're going to pick some, and so for us it's sort of Germany, Brazil, and Japan, but Brazil is the only place we've hired somebody so far.
Sure. And I was going to ask the same question for Colingo about the pricing strategy. How did you get to that value a month that you actually reached for charging Brazilian speakers?
So this, again, is something that we're experimenting with. And it's actually interesting. This is something that we literally decided a few days ago, the final prices, and we put it on the web, and
we actually had this conversation 2 months ago.
Yeah, when I came here 2 months ago, I was continuing the experiment because pricing is something that it's really important, and I think you're going to get it wrong initially, and you're going to want to not be too wrong, and it's something you're going to always iterate on. So the way that we decided is obviously we have a cost for what we know that the tutors charge, and then we want to have a margin. And then I just did surveys. I used SurveyMonkey. I don't know to decide what people thought they would want to pay for a service like this. I looked at English schools. I looked at what the private tutors cost, and we kind of arrived on something. So I have a question for you guys. Another survey. If you get 2 conversations of a half an hour a week for a month with a native English tutor, with all those amazing tools that you saw me present, how much would you anticipate paying? Yeah, anyone have a question and a thought? This is how I do customer feedback, by the way. 4 hours a month. It's 4 hours a month. So it's 200 reais.
Approximately 8 sessions of half an hour.
Yeah, it's 8 sessions of a half an hour. That's right. How much? 100. Okay. So we're about 125. And that seems like a good number for us. So that's the answer.
And a big discount if you come talk to us in person.
Okay.
Lidar com o trabalho da Colingo no sentido de tecnologicamente de precisar a voz. Vamos lá, vamos redefinir a pergunta. A Colingo trabalha o trabalho dela é ensinar, e ela usa o Skype. No Brasil a gente tem alguns problemas de conexão de banda larga, que não entrega o que promete, etc. Isso compromete o trabalho de vocês já? Enfim, mesmo o mercado brasileiro mostrando que vai haver uma melhora, mas isso ainda não aconteceu. A gente ainda tem muitos problemas de velocidade de conexão. Isso compromete o trabalho de vocês?
Did you get that?
I believe so. So the question is about Brazilian internet connections and the lack of speed and how we deal with that. So we're using, this is actually something that's very interesting to us. And other people who've been doing sort of online language pairing have generally done things within the browser. So that you're able to talk to someone without having to go to anything else. The problem with that is that it means that you're using a technology called Flash, which I don't know if most of you guys probably know. And Flash is not very good at dealing with, particularly with dealing with bad internet connections. And yes, you're absolutely right. You know, it's been one of the big problems for us. So originally when we started, we were also using Flash as the base and realized that was not going to work. And you know, for us, the primary thing before you can begin to even talk about higher levels of pronunciation and grammar and everything else, you need to have a rock solid internet connection quality. You need to be able to hear the person and they need to be able to hear you, or otherwise we can't do anything to either help you or to make us money. And so we had to really invest a lot in that, and what we've done is taken advantage of Skype. And Skype is the best of breed. It's the best that we can do on the internet for long distance communication. If you're curious about why Skype is so much better, I can tell you more about that. It has to do with the way that they do their technology. It's a different mindset. But yeah, it's a huge problem, and I think it's going to change. I think it's going to change very quickly over the next couple of years. Here in Brazil, I think, you know, we're seeing it already, that there's massive improvements in technical infrastructure going on in the country. And I look forward to seeing more of that. And I think that's, again, a huge opportunity for you guys, knowing how those changes are going to happen and being able to predict what is going to get better. You know, I think in entrepreneurship, so much of it is about seeing not what's there right now, but what will be there in 1 year or 2 years or 5 years. And you're going to have rock solid 4G, you know, it's coming. And so, you know, keep that in mind with everything you're doing. It's part of us. Yeah, we're saying, okay, sometimes we're going to have internet problems with people. So our solution needs to be able to handle that. But we're going to know that in the future, those are going to go away. So that's not going to stop us. But we need to handle those gracefully. And that's the best we can do right now.
Any further questions?
Good night, my name is Felipe, and I would like to know how do you manage to be unique in a market that's easy to enter and that people are always trying to copy your ideas?
You just spoiled my last question, but that's fine, yeah. What differentiates Colingo from the other platforms that are trying to teach English?
Sure. So I think I mentioned a few of those things. Probably the one that you guys have heard of the most is Live Mocha. Have you guys heard of Live Mocha here? So for one thing, Live Mocha has been, we think actually does a pretty good job of getting people up to a pretty basic level in the language. They have vocabulary and grammar, and they have, you know, fancy textbooks that they've put on the web and digitized. Where we don't think that they do a great job is giving people real feedback on speaking and listening skills. So you can talk to a native speaker on Live Mocha, but it's just talking. There's no structure around the conversation, and there's no advanced tools that give learners very clear feedback. So you're just basically paying for talking. So that's our real core differentiator, I think, focusing on speaking and listening and focusing on the problems of intermediate to advanced English learners.
Yeah, so...
Let's just interrupt you. How do you keep first?
Yeah. So it's interesting, and we spent a lot of time on this when I first was looking at joining SurveyMonkey. It turns out that, you know, it's not impossible for someone to build a very similar tool to ours. In fact, it probably with like 5 or 6 really smart, talented people in about 12 to 18 months, you could probably build a fairly comparable product. Probably wouldn't have all the internationalization and some of the other features that we have, but you could build a fairly comparable product. And it turns out there's a lot of them out there. We track like over 90 direct competitors, and more show up every day. So, and some of them have pretty decent products. But we actually have an advantage that's very different than a lot of other companies in that because we've built this brand over 12 years and we have all of these users and we get 40 million completed responses a month, and it's a very hard business to use advertising or sales to build a customer base. Those people who have a similar product to ours don't really have any way to gain customers. We own kind of all of the brand awareness and market share in the category, and it's very hard for someone to kind of go build a user base of any scale because people sort of know us already, and since they're not offering a better product, they're just offering us the same product, and because we're the, in the US we would say the Kleenex for tissue. I mean, this sort of becomes synonymous. SurveyMonkey is the brand for online surveys. There's not a lot of good reasons for someone to choose someone else, and our existing customers never are going to switch. They've got all their data tied with us. They've got all their surveys tied in. And so there's very high switching costs once you're in because you've done all this work. And so that sort of self-perpetuates this very good flywheel of, more survey creators sending out more surveys, more people learn about us, then some of them, more of them sign up, et cetera. And so even though we have all these competitors, we're far and away, the largest, probably, very high percentage of market share on a global basis. Even though we weren't in local languages, oftentimes we were still the largest online survey tool in a market like Brazil, even though we weren't in Portuguese for a long time, just because there was not a lot of other things people learned about. So we're building other kind of competitive advantages that will sort of hopefully also help us there. But it's a very unusual one. It would not help you win fundraising in a venture capital pitch to pitch that one as your competitive advantage to block out competitors. It's something that happened over time. It's not something you could sort of plan on or bet on.
I was going to ask about Google. When you do it for free, like on the free account, you can go up to 10 questions at SurveyMonkey. Is that right? Mm-hmm. And you can go further than that on Google to do a basic research, can't you?
Yeah, there's a Google Forms tool in Google Apps that you can use to do a similar kind of survey, and it doesn't have. You can do some of the things in there that we charge you for, but the tool is pretty crude, and so it does let you bypass our question limit and our response limit options, but the data you get back is not well formatted. The kind of the way in which you can structure questions is pretty crude. It's not for people who are going to do a lot of stuff. The people who are going to pay us are not going to be happy using Google Forms. We might get people who might use our free tool to use Google Forms instead of us, but usually those people, by the time they kind of get to something they would need a paid use case for, will switch to us because they're pretty unhappy with what they get out of Google Forms. And Google's not really interested in sort of investing in that part of the market. For example, one of the things we've done recently is we've created templates and questions that are sort of the right way to ask questions. And so you can use our questions from our question bank and our templates. Google's not going to sort of do that work to do that. So for some real simple basic things, the Google Forms will work fine, but basically our free tool will work fine for most of those things as well.
Any questions in between you? Okay, thank you very much for your presentation, Dave. Thank you very much for your presentation, Lee. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Rodolfo, very much. It was a great pleasure to have you here this evening. So, thank you.
I will say we do have student discounts though for SurveyMonkey. So,
see, he's still selling.
I didn't get that. can I get my money back from 3 years ago?
We spent it already.
Fast growing. Somewhere in Brazil.